In the early hours of 13 September 2024, gunshots suddenly rang out from a flat at Leabank Court in the town of Luton, England, causing alarmed neighbors to call the police. A few hours later, three members of the same family were found dead inside the flat. The family's eldest son had disappeared from the scene along with a shotgun. At first glance, this appeared to be an exceptionally serious case of family murder. But when investigators began examining the suspect's electronic devices and documents, they uncovered something far more disturbing. According to police, the three people who were killed may not have been the intended final targets. The young man who had just murdered his own mother and two younger siblings was believed to have been preparing to carry out an attack on a local primary school. And that leads to the biggest question surrounding the entire case. Did those who died in the flat in Luton that day inadvertently prevent one of the most horrific school massacres in British history? At approximately 5 a.m. on 13 September 2024, while most residents at Leabank Court were still asleep, several people were suddenly awakened by unusual sounds coming from a flat within the building. At first, there were loud noises, as though someone was running or struggling inside. Then came intermittent screams. Shortly afterwards, several gunshots rang out in the quiet of the early morning. Realizing that the situation appeared serious, a number of neighbors immediately called Bedfordshire police. The callers reported hearing gunfire from within the block of flats and feared that someone was in danger. The information was quickly passed to the nearest patrol units. Because the report involved a firearm, police treated it as a life-threatening emergency. As police vehicles were dispatched to the scene, no one yet knew exactly what had happened behind the door of that flat. Nor did anyone know that the emergency calls that had just been made would mark the beginning of one of Britain's most shocking criminal cases of 2024. When the first Bedfordshire police units arrived at Leabank Court, they quickly made their way to the flat believed to be the source of the gunfire. What awaited them behind the door was far beyond a routine disturbance or act of violence. Inside the flat, police discovered three people dead. The first victim was 48-year-old Juliana Falcon. Her body was found inside the property with severe firearm injuries. There were also signs on her body indicating that a violent struggle had taken place beforehand. Not far from her was 16-year-old Kyle Prosper. The teenager had also died in the attack. Evidence at the scene suggested that this was not an instantaneous death, but the result of a violent confrontation inside the flat. The third victim was 13-year-old Giselle Prosper. Her body was found beneath the dining table. The position in which she was discovered later led investigators to believe that she may have attempted to hide when the violence erupted inside the home. As the examination of the scene continued, officers noticed blood in multiple areas throughout the flat. The floor, walls, and numerous surfaces bore traces of the struggle that had taken place. The scene indicated that this had been an exceptionally violent attack. However, among the three bodies discovered, one person was missing. 18-year-old Nicholas Prosper, Juliana's son, was not at the scene. For investigators, that absence quickly became the most important detail in the opening hours of the investigation. The fact that Nicholas Prosper could not be found at the scene immediately shifted the direction of the investigation. For the officers present that morning, the most important question was no longer what had happened inside the flat, but where Nicholas was. As soon as police established that the 18-year-old had left the scene, Bedfordshire police launched an urgent manhunt. The area around Leabank Court was sealed off to prevent the suspect from traveling further, while patrol units were provided with Nicholas's description. At the same time, investigators began collecting footage from security cameras within the residential area. The first recordings quickly provided an important lead. CCTV footage showed Nicholas Prosper leaving the block of flats at approximately 5:33 a.m. In the footage, he was carrying a large dark-colored bag. Investigators later established that the bag contained the shotgun used in the killings, together with a substantial quantity of ammunition. The discovery of the CCTV footage helped police confirm that Nicholas was alive and had deliberately left the scene after the victims had died. However, at that point, investigators still did not know where the suspect was heading. A young man had just disappeared from the scene of a mass killing, carrying a firearm and ammunition, and was somewhere in the town of Luton. That was the situation facing police during the opening hours of the manhunt. While police units continued searching across the Luton area, Nicholas Prosper remained at large. The fact that a suspect had left the scene of a mass killing and was believed to be carrying a firearm significantly raised the level of concern. However, the manhunt did not last long. At approximately 7:55 a.m. on 13 September 2024, while police were still deploying officers across the area, Nicholas Prosper unexpectedly appeared on a street in Luton. According to the investigation, after more than 2 hours on the run, he appeared to realize that his plan could no longer be carried out. Rather than continuing to flee, Nicholas deliberately signaled to a nearby police patrol car. Officers quickly stopped and approached the young man. Nicholas was restrained and arrested at the scene without any further confrontation. During a search, police discovered that he was carrying a knife. Nicholas then directed officers to the location where he had hidden the shotgun and the ammunition he had taken with him when he left the flat. The recovery of the firearm removed the immediate threat to the public and provided investigators with one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. After the initial procedures were completed, Nicholas Prosper was taken to a police station for questioning. Meanwhile, investigators began trying to answer the question hanging over the entire case. What had led to the tragedy that unfolded inside the flat at Leabank Court in the early hours of that morning? In the first hours after his arrest, Nicholas appeared remarkably calm. His composed demeanor drew the attention of many investigators. There were no signs of panic or loss of control, unlike what people might typically expect from someone who had just been involved in an exceptionally serious incident. Police focused on reconstructing what had happened inside the flat during the early hours of that morning. They sought to establish the sequence of events, the origin of the firearm, and the reason why 3 members of the same family had lost their lives. At that stage, most of the information available to police came from the crime scene, statements from neighbors, and the evidence that had just been recovered. The investigation was still in its early stages, and many important questions remained unanswered. Nicholas Prosper was the only surviving person directly connected to the chain of events that had led to the tragedy. But what investigators did not yet know was that the answers they were about to uncover would take the case far beyond that of an ordinary family massacre. To understand what happened at Leabank Court in the early hours of 13 September 2024, investigators were forced to go back in time and look closely at the Prosper family itself. The family lived in a flat in the town of Luton, Bedfordshire, in the east of England. The mother was 48-year-old Juliana Falcon. Those who knew her described her as a devoted mother who put her children first and served as the center of the family. She lived in the flat at Leabank Court with her 3 children. Kyle Prosper, age 16, was the younger son. He was of secondary school age and lived what appeared to be a fairly ordinary teenage life. The youngest child was 3-year-old Giselle Prosper. She was still at school and was described by family and friends as well-behaved and sociable. The remaining member of the household was Nicholas Prosper, the older brother of Kyle and Giselle. At the time of the case, Nicholas was 18 years old. According to documents later presented in court, Nicholas had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. However, experts concluded that the condition did not affect his ability to distinguish right from wrong or his capacity to bear criminal responsibility. On the surface, the Prosper family was not one that regularly appeared in police records or was associated with serious violence. There were no obvious signs that an exceptionally serious tragedy was about to unfold inside the flat. But while the rest of his family continued with their everyday lives, Nicholas Prosper was spending much of his time in a different world online. A world that investigators would later believe played a significant role in shaping the plan that led to the killings. After the scene had been secured, forensic specialists began a detailed examination of the flat at Leabank Court. What they found indicated that this was not a shooting that had taken place in a matter of seconds and then ended. Signs of a struggle were present in multiple areas of the home. Blood was found on the floor, on the walls, and on numerous objects throughout the flat. Investigators also documented blood-stained handprints and drag marks, suggesting that those present had moved around during the incident. The post-mortem examinations gradually helped reconstruct the victim's final moments. Juliana Falcon, aged 48, died from a gunshot wound to the head. However, there were also multiple injuries to her hands and arms. Prosecutors would later argue that these injuries were consistent with defensive wounds sustained during a direct attack. Giselle Prosper, aged 13, died from a gunshot wound to the face. Her body was found beneath the dining table. The position in which she was discovered led investigators to believe that she may have attempted to hide when the violence erupted inside the flat. Kyle Prosper's case attracted particular attention from the investigation team. The 16-year-old had been shot twice. In addition, his body bore more than 100 sharp force injuries. The forensic findings indicated that a violent confrontation had taken place inside the flat before all three victims died. Alongside the forensic examination, police reviewed CCTV footage from the surrounding area. The footage quickly confirmed that Nicholas Prosper had left Leabank Court at approximately 5:33 a.m. The CCTV showed the young man carrying a large bag as he left the block of flats alone. After his arrest, police established that the bag contained the shotgun used in the killings together with a substantial quantity of ammunition. This early evidence helped investigators establish that Nicholas was the last person seen leaving the scene. However, it still did not answer the most important question. Why had an 18-year-old young man killed his own mother and two younger siblings? If the forensic evidence helped investigators understand what had happened inside the flat, the electronic devices seized during the investigation would help them understand why it had happened. During the search of the property, police seized Nicholas Prosper's phone, computer, and several data storage devices. As specialists began analyzing their contents, the picture of the case gradually began to change. Initially, investigators focused on looking for signs of family conflict. However, what they discovered led them in an entirely different direction. Internet search records showed that Nicholas had spent a considerable amount of time researching some of the world's most notorious mass shootings. The names of incidents such as Sandy Hook in the United States, Virginia Tech, Christchurch in New Zealand, and numerous other mass killings appeared repeatedly throughout the investigation data. Nicholas was not merely reading news reports about these events. According to evidence later presented in court, he had also researched the perpetrators, the number of victims, the methods used, and the impact each attack had generated. As investigators continued examining his computer, they discovered numerous documents indicating that Nicholas had been quietly preparing for a plan over an extended period. He had saved images, articles, and materials relating to well-known mass shooters. A number of personal notes were also recovered from his electronic devices. Some of these documents attracted particular attention from the investigation team. Among them were passages describing a desire to create a shocking event, attract widespread attention, and become widely known after death. The deeper investigators delved into the digital evidence, the more convinced they became that the killings at Leabank Court were not the result of a sudden outburst of anger within the family. The evidence suggested that this may have been a plan that had been prepared in advance. Then, among the thousands of files extracted from Nicholas's phone and computer, police discovered documents that revealed what appeared to be his true objective. It was a discovery that changed the entire direction of the investigation, because investigators now began to suspect that the three people killed in the flat may not have been the only intended victims in his plan. Investigators' suspicions were quickly confirmed as they continued analyzing the data recovered from Nicholas Prosper's phone and computer. This was the point at which the investigation took a completely different direction. Initially, police believed they were dealing with an exceptionally serious family massacre, but the documents they uncovered suggested that the three people killed in the flat at Leabank Court may have been only one part of a much larger plan. According to the investigation, Nicholas had been preparing that plan for months. On 12 September 2024, just one day before the killings, he used a sophisticated forged firearms certificate to purchase a shotgun and ammunition from a private seller. The transaction was later determined to have been worth approximately £650. Investigators also discovered that Nicholas had deliberately chosen the date of the attack. He had originally intended to act on 12 September. However, the plan was later postponed until Friday, 13 September 2024. According to evidence presented in court, Nicholas believed the date carried a special significance and would attract greater attention. But the most disturbing discovery was found within his personal notes and electronic documents. Police recovered sketches and plans relating to St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School in Luton, where Nicholas had attended as a child. Among the materials were classroom layouts, school timetables, and notes relating to the daily routines of pupils. Nicholas had monitored the school in advance, studied periods when large numbers of people would be gathered together, and recorded extensive information about the school grounds. One particular document left investigators deeply disturbed. Alongside a classroom layout appeared a short handwritten phrase, "Kill all." Evidence later indicated that Nicholas's intended targets extended far beyond his own family. According to the prosecution's conclusions, the original plan was to kill his mother and two siblings while they were asleep, then take the shotgun to St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School at the start of the school day. His objective was to inflict mass casualties among pupils and staff. Documents recovered during the investigation showed that Nicholas was particularly obsessed with notorious attacks such as Sandy Hook and Virginia Tech. He studied the number of victims, the level of media attention they received, and sought ways to surpass those figures. According to the case records, Nicholas had expressed a desire to carry out the biggest massacre of the 21st century in order to achieve notoriety after his death. But the plan did not unfold as intended. During the final hours before the killings, Juliana Falcon discovered that her son was in possession of the shotgun. A confrontation followed inside the flat. The struggle woke Kyle and Giselle. The noise attracted the attention of neighbors. Emergency calls were made. Police were dispatched. That chain of events ultimately brought down the entire plan Nicholas Prosper had spent months preparing. And that is why many people later came to believe that Juliana Falcon, Kyle Prosper, and Giselle Prosper were not merely victims of the case. They may have inadvertently prevented one of the most serious school shootings in British history. The trial took place at Luton Crown Court in 2025 and attracted significant attention from both the British media and the public. What emerged during the proceedings revealed the true scale of the plan Nicholas Prosper had prepared before carrying out the killings. Prosecutors presented a substantial body of evidence gathered during the investigation. This included data recovered from the defendant's phone and computer, internet search histories, personal notes, school layouts, stored images and materials relating to some of the world's most notorious mass shootings. In particular, the prosecution argued that the killings at Leabank Court were not intended to be the end of the plan, but merely its first stage. According to the prosecution's case, Nicholas Prosper intended to murder his family before traveling to St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School to carry out an attack on pupils and staff. During the trial, jurors heard detailed evidence about the notes Nicholas had left behind, including documents showing that he had spent months studying notorious school shootings. One issue raised during the proceedings concerned the defendant's mental health. Experts confirmed that Nicholas had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. However, all of the specialists involved in the assessment concluded that the condition did not impair his ability to understand his actions or his criminal responsibility. The court also heard that Nicholas had developed an obsession with mass killings and a desire to achieve notoriety through violence. The volume of evidence collected by police was regarded as particularly compelling. Faced with that evidence, Nicholas Prosper chose not to contest responsibility for his actions. On 24 February 2025, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, along with a number of firearms and weapons offenses. For the victim's family, the guilty pleas brought an end to any question of who was responsible, but they did nothing to lessen the pain left behind by the case. Now, all that remained was for the court to determine the sentence that would be imposed on the man responsible for the tragedy. On 19 March 2025, Nicholas Prosper appeared once again at Luton Crown Court to be sentenced. After considering all the evidence, the defendant's guilty pleas, and the scale of the plan that had been prepared, Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb delivered a particularly stern assessment. According to the court, Nicholas had not only caused the deaths of his mother and 2 younger siblings, he had also planned a school shooting intended to cause mass casualties in pursuit of notoriety. The judge concluded that this was a carefully calculated plan, prepared in advance, and carried out with full intent. Nicholas Prosper was convicted of 3 counts of murder, along with offenses relating to the illegal acquisition of a firearm, possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life, and possession of a knife in a public place. The final sentence imposed was life imprisonment. The court ordered that Nicholas must serve a minimum term of 49 years before he can be considered for parole. For the victim's family, the sentence brought an end to a legal process that had lasted for many months. However, no judgment could alter what happened at Leabank Court in the early hours of 13 September 2024. The case had reached its legal conclusion, but the questions surrounding its causes, motivations, and the lessons it leaves behind continued to be discussed long afterwards. The Nicholas Prosper case was not merely a family massacre. It also serves as a warning about dangers that can develop quietly behind the doors of what appears to be an ordinary home. During the investigation, police discovered that Nicholas had spent months studying some of the world's most notorious mass shootings. The violent material he repeatedly consumed online gradually became part of his thinking and his plans. While not everyone exposed to such content becomes a criminal, the case illustrates how immersion in extremist communities and the glorification of violence can lead to particularly dangerous consequences. The case also highlights the importance of recognizing warning signs at an early stage. Behind Nicholas's quiet and isolated lifestyle was a plan that had been prepared over many months without those around him realizing it. Another lesson comes from the response of the local community. Neighbors did not ignore the unusual sounds coming from the flat at Leabank Court. They called the police as soon as they heard gunshots and the sounds of a struggle. That response helped officers arrive quickly and contributed to preventing the suspect's next planned attack. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the case lies in the fate of Juliana Falcon, Kyle Prosper, and Giselle Prosper. According to the evidence presented in court, had the confrontation not taken place inside the flat during the early hours of that morning, Nicholas Prosper may have taken the shotgun to St. Joseph's Catholic Primary School and carried out the attack he had been planning. That has led many people to believe that the 3 victims were not merely those who lost their lives in this case. They may have inadvertently prevented a tragedy on a far greater scale. And that is what many people in Luton still remember when they speak about the Nicholas Prosper case, a family tragedy that claimed 3 lives, but may also have saved the lives of dozens of other children.